I'm a fiction writer now. I wrote a bit of fiction when I was younger, but I'm writing fiction a lot more now. And poetry is the reason why I found the confidence to be able to write fiction. And I think that there's this beautiful honesty and vulnerability that we can find in poetry, especially contemporary poetry that encourages us to tap into our rawest feelings sometimes. Um, and there's also something like liberating about being able to share so candidly through poems, whether the subject matter is, anxiety or love or our fears or the things that just make us so angry or the injustices in the world. Um, and there's also something that can be really terrifying about bearing your soul in front of an audience, and both things are totally valid, and I want to reflect on both of those tonight. But I think some of the most beautiful moments of my life have been at open mic nights. Just sitting down and listening to somebody speak from their heart and pour their soul into a poem. I've never experienced anything more beautiful personally. So I'm so excited to be able to celebrate that with you all. So I am going to read a poem with you. This is a poem from my first book, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, and we're talking about vulnerability tonight. And to me, this poem is like the encapsulation of what I mean when I say that there's power in being vulnerable. This is a poem that I wrote autobiographically. So not everything I write not all the poems I write are autobiographical. Sometimes I write in character, sometimes I write in third person, sometimes I write in first person. But in this case, when I was writing this particular poem, I was speaking as me, as Jasmin. And I was tapping into some of my fears and my anxieties and the things that I'm confused about in life. And I felt comfortable sharing those in a poem and including those poems in my book, which would be shared publicly. Um, and emphasis on I felt comfortable, because I don't always feel comfortable sharing everything that is in my mind. And that's a conversation we're going to have next about boundaries. So the poem reads, "You tell me that you are grateful that I am here, that the world is better for my presence, that maybe things would have been different if I never was, that maybe my being has helped another being be, and I am 25 years into this body, pouring into the ink black of your eyes, sitting atop a spherical classroom that my people know to be alive, wondering how to meet me, knowing that I will leave me, wondering how I found myself on this tightrope where I must walk until I let go, wondering what I'm supposed to do with love if I am only learning how to wash it away, wondering how much longing exists in all the spaces between space, wondering if all the ache, all the separation between life and death still hangs somewhere in the air after centuries and centuries of all these humans yearning for love and God and themselves and each other, wondering if the earth could even carry such a burden. Almost certain, but never certain, that sadness and suffering and fear can only exist in the minds of the living. Almost certain that somewhere between the fabric of oxygen and attachment and all my questions, there is a universe that is still and still breathing and okay." And the poem that follows this piece on the next page reads, "I've tried boarding up the windows with deep breathing and changing all the locks on my thoughts. But when anxiety moves into my body, I am pushed out onto the street with nothing but a box of crushed courage and a few flimsy distractions to hold me over until she decides it is time to leave." So these two poems, they are definitely autobiographical. They are poems that deal with my own anxiety. And I think they were very challenging to write and share with the world, because I think that there's something about digging into those tough places in ourselves where it can be hard to just share with others for very understandable reasons. And sometimes I feel like sharing and sometimes I don't. That's just human nature, I think, for all of us. But I found that sometimes when I share those things that feel so specifically me, feel like only I could be going through them and only I would understand. I'm always surprised to know that I am not alone, and that those feelings are relatable. And I think that's the beauty of being human, that, you know, we are in this together, and sometimes we don't always realize that's the case. But going back to my original point, I think it's very important to recognize what you want to share with the world and what you don't want to share with the world. There are pieces of ourselves that we might feel obligated to share sometimes, but I think that is so important to know as a writer, as a creative writer, as an artist, that you get to decide what is that you want to put into your story, and you get to decide how you tell that story. You get to decide who that story reaches, um, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to create boundaries sometimes. As a person in my late 20s, I am all about boundaries. In my teens, in my early 20s, I wasn't so sure about boundaries. I didn't really know how to set them or like stick to them, or assert them. I was kind of, maybe it came from the introvert part of myself, or maybe just the fact that girls are often taught that we need to be like really, really nice all the time. And for some reason, the world tells us that means that we can't be assertive in you know, what we're comfortable with and what we're not. But boundaries are so important, especially as artists. So for me, for example, I set a boundary, like a boundary with social media, by not always responding to every single DM that I get. Sometimes I'm just like tired, I'm emotionally burnt out, and I just don't have the capacity to respond to everything that comes my way. And that's an act of self-care for me, and it's a boundary for me. So shifting gears a little bit, I am going to now read a poem from If I Tell You the Truth. And this poem is written by the character Sahara in the novel. So speaking a little bit about the novel, If I Tell You the Truth is the story of a Punjabi mother and daughter living in Canada and dealing with the Canadian immigration system. This is a system that is not built for the safety of marginalized people. And simultaneously, they are up against a very powerful public figure who has caused them harm. And they are trying to navigate how it is that they can use their voices and find their voices to right things that have gone really wrong. And in the novel, once you read it, you'll see that there's a lot of conversation about art, about the struggles of speaking up and finding your voice, and how art itself, poetry and visual art, can be a source of healing, a source of rest, joy, how art and visual art specifically can help heal anxiety. So the character Sahara, she is a visual artist, and she paints and draws and creates when she's feeling anxious, especially because that for her, that's like self-care, and that's how she heals from her anxiety. She also uses poetry to channel her rawest of raw emotions. So like me, Sahara finds a lot of strength in poetry. And that's why part of the novel is actually written in her poems, and the poems are all in her voice and her mom's voices. So this poem that I'm going to share, I don't want to give away too many spoilers about the book, so I won't give you a ton of context, but Sahara is very angry, and she is reflecting on how she wants to speak up about the things she is angry about, the injustice she's angry about, but she's not sure how, and she doesn't know if she has the courage to do what she wants to do. So she is drawing inspiration to find her voice, to tap into the activist spirit through a character from a movie that she really loves. So I'm not sure if you guys have seen The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. If you have, feel free to just let me know in the chat box. But The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Lisbeth, she's a huge source of inspiration for Sahara. And for a little bit of context, Lisbeth is a character who fights injustice, and who especially seeks justice against, you know, people who have caused harm to marginalized people, especially women, through like her own version of vigilante justice. And watching this film, when Sahara watched this film, she found a lot of strength and bravery and awe and wonder from that character. So you're going to see a character talking about another character from a different book, if that makes sense. The title is At 4 in the Morning. Mom and BBG are awake for Amrit Vela meditation. And I rewatch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, learning, studying, seeking catharsis from the only superhero who deserves the title. Like muscle memory, I know the scenes that make me tremble, the parts I need to skip, the parts I need to rewind and play again and again and again. I pause at the exact moment when Lisbeth stands in the elevator, fingers outstretched, reaching for his forehead, making him cower in fear at a woman he will never dare to touch again. I wish I could write to her, will her into existence, churn her into more than words on paper and compelling acting before a camera. Pray to her like a patron saint, leave an offering of white peonies and thornless roses at her feet. I wish I could find a Lisbeth within me. So that was Sahara's self-reflection as she's watching this film. And I think it encapsulates so much of what I mean when I say that poetry is a way of channeling our rawest of raw emotions, tapping into our vulnerable feelings, tapping into our righteous anger, because I think that anger can be a beautiful, important thing, especially in the face of so much injustice. So in this writing activity, we are going to be journaling for ourselves. Oftentimes as creative writers, we tend to write with like a reader in our brain. We kind of almost see the audience before we even let ourselves put pen to paper or just begin typing. We start thinking, okay, what is someone going to think of this piece of writing? Do I need to edit this? Is my are my metaphors like good? Do I need to switch everything up? Am I being succinct? And we have all these like editorial thoughts in our brains that we've kind of been conditioned to process and think about before we are even able to start writing. And I personally find that when I have this constant thought of an audience in my mind, it actually stops me from writing. It kind of creates a sense of writer's block for me, because I get so caught up and so worried about what my audience is going to think of my writing, that I feel like I just can't write. And I don't know if that's like a relatable feeling, but that's definitely like what I experience. So when I let go of the fear of an audience, when I give myself license to write, knowing that my writing is just for me, that's when things start naturally flowing. So in this activity, you are writing just for you. If at the end you'd like to share an excerpt of what you write, you definitely can, but there is like no pressure to share this with anyone in the world. This is all about you. And in this activity, you've got this prompt right here on the screen that says, I am free when. And all you have to do is begin with that prompt and let that prompt take you wherever it wants to take you. There is no right or wrong answer. There is no specific direction you have to go. It's whatever that means for you in this moment, and wherever your mind naturally wants to go. Imagine now as you're writing that you have an audience in mind, that you are writing, and you might be planning to share this with someone else. As you're writing this entirely new poem or prose piece from the piece that you just wrote, I want you to think about it now with that audience in mind, with that editorial lens, back on in your mind. Think about how you would edit it if you were in an editorial workshop. Think about how you would edit it if you were a peer editor. Think about how you'd edit it to make sure that you are conveying your message as clearly as possible to your reader.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. This has been absolutely full. There's so much knowledge and insight and poetry that you shared with us today. And I just want to ask if everyone who's here could just unmute yourself and give Jasmine just the warmest round of applause and woohoo and thank you so much you can.
Congrats,
Thank
Jasmine!
you. That was very
Thank you.
inspiring.
Thank
Very
you, Jasmine.
inspiring. Thank
That was
you.
Thank you.